Hello and welcome. In this video, we are going to take another look at our CentOS Stream 9 virtual machine that we have installed. And this video assumes a couple things. Number one, that you have installed your Oracle VirtualBox manager, that you have set up a client one or even a server one virtual machine. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go through, this is that first use wizard. In other words, we've installed the operating system, we've rebooted it, and now it's time to actually use our CentOS Stream 9 installation. And this video is not going to focus yet on any of the command line things that we will be doing in later videos. We're just going to focus on making sure we understand how to finish getting our CentOS Stream 9 set up. So the first thing that you've probably already noticed is that once you click in your virtual machine, you are now trapped. And this has probably become quite annoying. If you've not yet figured it out, you'll notice that it's actually giving you this hint in the bottom right-hand side of the screen, or you had gotten a prompt that talks about mouse capture. Well, if you want to get out of your virtual machine, you simply, on a Windows machine, you click the right control key, and you'll notice that then I can move my mouse back outside of my virtual machine. Again, if you click in the virtual machine, then you're moving the mouse inside the virtual machine. And if you click on the right control key, then you can get out. Now, we are going to fix this in a later video. This is going to involve installing the guest editions CD, but we are not there yet. So for right now, we're going to have to be a little bit patient. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to go ahead and click Start Setup. I encourage you, especially in this particular case, since we're just playing around with our CentOS installation, that we go ahead and do things like turn off the location services. And also, there's no reason to connect your online accounts. Technically speaking, CentOS can be used in an enterprise environment. For instance, if you have an enterprise LDAP setup. But again, we're planning on using a local installation here for testing purposes, networking, practicing with Linux, etc. So there's no reason to use an enterprise login. But instead, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and create a local account that is not going to be our root account. Now, we'll talk about root in just a second so you can appreciate the difference. But for right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and set up a account here. I'm going to set it up as Gregory Myers, which is my full name, but I'm going to use my email address here, or essentially the first part of my email address, in case you want to reach out to me for the username. And I encourage you to keep this one relatively short, much like your password for the root account, at least for the first pass. Again, we can worry about security later on. This just simply makes it a little easier. Now, at this point, then you can hit Next. And you can go ahead and put a password in. Again, I encourage you to have a reasonable password, but since we're not going to have this particular virtual machine public facing, you don't have to worry as much about security. Now, obviously, if you're in a professional setting or if this is a production machine, then that's a completely different story. But in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and set up a basic password here and confirm it, and then hit Next. And at this point, we can go ahead and start using CentOS Stream. Now, the first thing that you note is that the screen size is rather small. We have our background. We can go ahead and select No Thanks to take on the tour. But you notice that you have a pretty small screen to work with. And so the first thing we'd like to do is to improve on that. Until we install those guest editions, we will have to change this multiple times. But first thing that you want to do is go ahead and change your display settings. And depending on which size of monitor you're on, you'll have to play around with this just a little bit. I think, for instance, probably 1440 by 900 should work for the purposes of the monitor I'm on, as well as the video that I'm recording. Let's see if we can do any larger here. Maybe the 1680 by 1050 should work. Let's give that a shot. I think it should. So we're going to go ahead and keep changes. Again, I have to right control click to get out and to be able to move the virtual machine box around. And then Your key is, or your goal is, that you shouldn't see any scroll bars either on the right side or on the bottom. And again, this looks pretty good, so we will leave it at that. Now, for right now, you are going to have to make those changes every time you log in or you reboot your virtual machine. And again, we will fix that. Now, before we get started with doing any major changes to our virtual machine, let's just take an opportunity to look around. In addition to things like the settings, which you can go through, and you can change many things about your virtual machine, including the background, the display settings. There's networking, and so on. There's a lot of different options, much like on any other operating system, whether it be on a Windows or a Mac. You can, for instance, change the behavior of your mouse and touchpad, add printers, and so on. In addition, you've got this activities button up here, which allow for you to choose between a web browser. By default, you're going to get Firefox. You can also install other web browsers. The file manager or files is essentially the equivalent of Finder or Windows Explorer. It's very similar, actually, to Finder. So for anyone using a Mac, you should probably feel right at home already. If we go back to our activities again, you'll see a software folder. And again, we've got the ability to essentially use something similar to an app store, or essentially it's a repository. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about those, but you can look through software that is available for our CentOS install. And then continuing on down through here, you'll see help. We're going to be playing around with the terminal quite a bit, so probably wouldn't be a bad idea to launch that. And you can see, again, a very similar feel to what you would have experienced with a Mac or a Windows machine. We will focus on commands for our Linux machine in later videos. Right now, we're just basically getting a little bit of familiarity. Again, you can right-click on the screen to go to settings and display settings, but you can also just simply select the settings under the activities. And then lastly, we can show the applications that were installed. Now, some of these were installed as part of the wizard that we went through in an earlier video. We can also go through and install additional pieces of software. For instance, in a later video, I'm going to show you how to install Wireshark. You can see that you've got LibreOffice, which is essentially a competitive product, I guess you could call it, to Microsoft Office. I encourage you to look at some of the features that are available in LibreOffice, just so you've got some familiarity with the software ecosystem on a Linux machine. Now, again, one of the reasons why I picked CentOS is because it is pretty friendly. Is it necessarily the quote-unquote best Linux distribution? Arguably not. It has its pros and cons. One of the advantages is that it's related to Red Hat Linux Enterprise, which means you do get a fairly good level of support. Again, is it the perfect best Linux distribution? Well, in the Linux world, it's a little different because it's based on what you want to do with your Linux distribution. In other words, if you're, for instance, wanting to host a lightweight web server, then perhaps CentOS is not your first choice. However, though, hopefully you would agree that it is a nice user experience, especially if you've added a little extra RAM to your virtual machine and possibly have a couple of extra CPUs to spare. If you've forgotten how to do that, basically just power off your virtual machine, go back into the settings for the virtual machine, and you can adjust the hardware. You can tell, for instance, that if it's a little bit jerky, then you probably need to add some more resources to it. So that's essentially all I want to cover in this particular video. What I would encourage you to do now is to play around a little bit with your Linux machine. We are going to make some significant improvements to it. Particularly, we're going to focus on those guest machine additions so that you don't end up getting your mouse captured inside of your virtual machine all the time. You can see here that I'm intentionally bumping my mouse against the edge of the screen here so you can see the problem. And again, if you're on a Windows machine, you just hit the right control button to get yourself out of your virtual machine, and then your mouse can move freely. So as always, hopefully you found this video useful. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, don't hesitate to reach out to me, and thank you for watching.